I read one time that this was something that was posted, a notice that was posted on a employee bulletin board at a business. It says, due to increased competition and a keen desire to stay in business, we find it necessary to institute a new policy. We are asking that somewhere between starting time and quitting time, and without infringing on the time devoted to lunch, coffee breaks, rest periods, storytelling, ticket selling, vacation planning, and rehashing of gossip, each employee endeavors to find some time to set aside as what we're calling the work break. This may seem a radical innovation, but we believe the idea has possibilities. It can conceivably be an aid to steady employment and regular paychecks. While adoption of the work break is not compulsory, it is hoped that each employee will find time to give it a fair trial. For the 6 years that I spent working in radio advertising, I came in contact with a lot of different businesses, small businesses, big businesses. And one of the problems they all had, every one of them, was how do we find and keep good employees? It was a problem that they all faced. Now you say, okay, employees, what does it have to do with what we're going to talk about today? Are you a good employee? Do you work hard? So what's that have to do with my Christianity? Actually, the Bible talks about having a work ethic. What does that mean? What does it mean that we are to have a work ethic? What does the Bible really teach us about work? There's an interesting story that we find in 2 Thessalonians 3, 2 Thessalonians chapter 3. That Paul's making some personal comments here to the people of Thessalonica about a problem that they had. And picking it up in verse 6, he says, "But we command you, brethren, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that you withdraw from every brother who walks disorderly and not according to the tradition which you received from us." Now, these people were disorderly. And he's actually saying, these people have become so disorderly in the congregation that we're just suggesting you don't even talk to them. Now, that's a pretty strong statement. You think, what in the world are they doing? I mean, disorderly means that they're causing problems, they're destroying relationships. I mean, what in the world are these people doing that cause that kind of problem? You think, well, they must have some heresy, that they're teaching, or what are they doing? He says, for you yourselves know, he says, let me give you an example here. For you yourselves know how you ought to follow us. He's talking about him and some traveling companions who had been with him when he went to actually visit the church in Thessalonica. How you ought to follow us, for we were not disorderly among you. Okay, well, we didn't create this problem. We were there. So we tried to show you an example. He says, nor did we eat anyone's bread free of charge, but worked with labor and toil night and day, that we might not be a burden to any of you. Not because we did not have authority, but to make ourselves an example of how you should follow us. So he uses himself as an example. He says, when I came there with his ministerial companions, he says, we didn't take any money from you to serve you while we were there. But they worked day and night. And of course, we know that he was a tent maker. So he says, we worked our own jobs and didn't take money, even though we could have. I mean, it would only be ethically right for the church to support us while we were there. But he says, no, we didn't ask anything from you. So there's a problem here he's getting to that has to do with disorderly conduct. He says, for even when we were with you, we commanded you this: if anyone will not work, neither shall he eat. For we hear that there are some who walk among you in a disorderly manner, not working at all, but they're busybodies. Now those who are such we command and exhort through our Lord Jesus Christ that they work in quietness and eat their own bread. Boy, what kind of major problem were they having? Now, I don't know exactly, but the cause was that there was a large enough group of people in their city, in their congregation, who just refused to work. They just didn't work. And it says they were busybodies. They spent their time just meddling in everybody else's business. So they were creating this constant problem in the church, which, I mean, that seems sort of odd to us today. I mean, I don't think I've ever been in a congregation where I've seen this exact problem, where you had a large number of people just creating all this problem in the church because they just refused to work. But there's an important statement he makes here. He says, for even when we were with you, he says, for if they shall not work, they shall not eat. If anyone will not work, neither shall he eat. What's the point he's making? Now, the Bible is very clear in the absolute command to take care of the poor. Everyone has a responsibility to take care of the poor. Poor people who are there because some calamity has happened, because maybe they just don't have the skills to get certain jobs. Maybe there's all kinds of reasons why someone could be poor. And the church is given, and ancient Israel were given explicit commands to help take care of poor people. What Paul says here is, if a person is poor because they won't eat, because they won't work, you don't take care of them. Now that seems strange too in the society we live in. And why would he say that? Well, if the person is hungry and he says no, if it's because they refuse to eat, let them get hungry and then they will go work. Let them get hungry, then they'll go work. So he's making a point here. Now, once again, we have to put this in the context of why he makes this statement. There is in the congregation a group of people who cause nothing but problems in the church. They're meddling in everybody else's businesses. Businesses are probably just showing it up at people's houses, expecting to be taken care of. Although I have had as a pastor, a few people that do that. I've come across people who will go from church to church. And they'll come in and they'll spend 3-4 months at a church, living with people, being taken care of by people, always saying they're going to get a job. Sometimes I've seen it go on for 6 months. And people will take them in. A lot of times it's older people. Then they'll wear out their welcome there and go someplace else. And eventually it comes down to this person doesn't even look for a job. And so you have a conversation and say, look, you just can't come in and take advantage of these people. I mean, in some cases, large amounts of money were given to them, and then they disappear. And then I get an email from another pastor that says, hey, so-and-so has showed up at my church, and they just moved in with a couple of the elderly people. And I've seen men, it's always men, but I've seen men be able to do this sometimes for a couple years before they get caught. Now, Paul would say, sorry, you don't work, you don't eat. We don't give you anything. You don't work, you don't receive shelter. He's talking about Christians, taking care of Christians here. He says, if you refuse to do certain things, then the church is not to take care of you. So this means work is important. Now, this is an extreme example, but this is where I want to start. It must be important for Paul to make these instructions to a church. If the person refuses to work, it's not that they can't work, or maybe they just don't have a lot of skills or whatever, and they're doing the best they can. Maybe they have a real low-paying job because that's all they can do, then we're supposed to take care of them, help them. But if they refuse to work, he says, then you don't take care of them. So work is important. Work is an important part of who we are because work is part of our Christian character. Now, I'm not going to talk about being a workaholic here. I might mention it a couple of times. Being a workaholic is the other end of the scale. Being a workaholic is spiritually wrong also. When we put ourselves into our work so much that we're not having a right relationship with God, we're not taking care of our families, we're not taking care of ourselves. And recreation is part of life. Fun is part of life. So that's that other extreme. But usually we as human beings tend to fall on the sort of lazy side than the workaholic side. So we're going to talk about work today because it is an ethical issue. Now, I will say this. When I talk about work here, And I've seen this happen in the church. I've actually had people come to me and want to counsel because they'll say, I've realized that I'm preparing for the kingdom of God. And since I'm preparing for the kingdom of God, I'm just and you can fill in the blank. I'm just a construction worker. I'm just a salesman. I'm just a housewife. I'm just a office worker. And whatever they fill in, and they say, probably I need to get another job to prepare for the kingdom of God. Your career isn't the issue. It's your work ethic that's the issue. It's your work ethic that's the issue, not what you're doing. I used to tell my kids, find out what you're really good at that makes you happy and go become the best at it. You may not make the most money, but you will be happy. When you're doing work you love, you're happy. Now, unfortunately, every job has drudgery. We'll talk about that in a minute. And you can be trapped at a job sometimes for a while that you hate. Okay, what do you do with that? Well, we'll talk about that in a minute too. These are all real issues. This is practical Christianity. Practical Christianity. So it doesn't matter what job you do. God doesn't care if you're an architect. God doesn't care if you're a boss with 100 people. I say doesn't care. What's really interesting is go through all the scriptures about employers. There are lots of scriptures in the Old and New Testament about employers. There's one of the laws in the Old Testament that says if you withhold your wages that you owe people as an employer, God will punish you. Isn't that a little scary? God says, I hold that personally. That's a personal issue. If people work for you and you hold back their wages, then that's personal between me and you. I will deal with that. So there's a lot of instructions about bosses and employers, but we're going to talk about employees today. Most of us are employees. There's a few here that might own your own business, but most of us do not. So what does the Bible teach about work? I talked about your jobs. Most people will have multiple jobs in a lifetime. What's really different than, say, 50 years ago, my dad, his dad, back then, most people had one career. Many times they worked for the same company their entire lives. That's not true today. Most of you, if you're young, you're going to have more than one career. You actually have more than one career. You may start out in something and end up doing something totally different by the end of your life. In fact, the average person today will have 3 different careers. Now, we're not talking about 3 different jobs. You may have a career which you work for 3 or 4 different companies, and then another career, and you work for 3 or 4 different companies. So it's changed from, it used to be you get hired by somebody, you work for that same company maybe your whole life. It's not that way anymore. Remember, it's not the specific job. It's the work ethic that's the Christian part of what you do. God doesn't care if you're a farmer. Be a good farmer. Like I used to tell my son, he loved working on cars. I said, go be a car mechanic. I can't make a lot of money. Just go be the best car mechanic you can be. Now he's selling insurance and loves it. So I was wrong on that one. But that's what I used to tell my kids. I can't determine what you're going to do. You have to decide that. You have to decide what you're going to do because it's your life. It's not mine. So learn the work ethic, and you're going to be pretty much successful in everything you do. Now, I say successful. Even if you do it right, bad things happen. In preparing this, I looked up probably 10 websites. They were business websites, they were management websites. One was a college website giving advice to students on reasons people get fired. And the number one was they just don't do their job. Like number 2 was people fall asleep. That kept showing up all over. People sleep. Number 3 was they're spending all their day on their cell phone or they're just not involved in their work. There was all these reasons. But then I saw another list from a business magazine. It was pretty interesting. It said, we're going to tell you some other reasons why people get fired. The boss wants to give the job to his nephew, okay? And then there were reasons why you get fired, which you were doing a great job and your manager becomes absolutely jealous of you and gets you fired. And I've known people that have gone through that. Got fired because they were doing a good job and somebody got jealous. So, okay, life, there's no magic pill that says do this equals perfect success. That's not life. Sometimes you do it right and something bad happens. The difference is when you're doing it right, you will find something else to do. You can recover from the problem if you're doing it right. If you're doing it wrong, you get fired from some place 3 or 4 times just because it says you're insubordinate. You just aren't going to listen to your boss. You think he's an idiot. And you've been fired from 3 places because you think the boss is an idiot. Guess what the next boss is going to do? Not hire you. Right? They don't want to put up with that. So if you do it the right way, you have a much better chance of recovering from the bad things when they happen. Do it the wrong way, and sooner or later you dig yourself in a hole. What does the Bible say about work? Let's go to Colossians. And say, well, this isn't a spiritual issue. Whether I daydream on the job, whether I play video games on the job when I should be doing something else. That's not a spiritual issue. Colossians chapter 3, verse 22. Bondservants. Now, bondservants, in other words, you work for somebody because you owed them something. This is a type of employership. There were businesses in the Roman Empire where they hired employees. There were people that had bondservants. In other words, you owe me something, so you got to work for me. There were people who, if you're a craftsman especially, you would be hired out to different people. Of course, they had slaves too. So Paul's just talking to a class of people that work for other people. He says, obey in all things your masters according to the flesh. What? Now, not if they tell you to do something against God. No, if your employer tells you to do something dishonest, you say no. And sooner or later, most of us have had to face that. I've had to face it earlier in my life. Where you just say, I can't do that. That's immoral. That's wrong, whatever you're asking me to do. I remember one radio station, I probably mentioned this before, I was really supposed to go date all the girls, the young girls that worked at the advertising agencies after, not date, just go to the bar with them. He said, I got a pregnant wife at home. I'm not going to go out after work and take these young single women to a bar. He said, well, you don't have to let them know you won't do anything. That's literally what I was told. Just, have some fun with them, and then you'll get the account. And I said, I don't want the account that bad. The owner of that radio station told me, it was the #1 radio station in Austin, Texas. He said, you're a nice guy. And in my experience, nice guys don't make it in my companies. I didn't. Okay. So, you obey them in their job, in what they're telling you to do. Not with eye service, as men pleasers. In other words, you're not doing this because you just want to get on the good side of your boss, but in sincerity of heart. In other words, you do your job, you do it because you want to do the job right. Why? Because you're fearing God. And whatever you do, do it heartily as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of the inheritance, for you serve the Lord Jesus Christ. What? He makes this a spiritual issue. When you go to work, you give all that you have because you think that you're serving God. I'm serving God. Why would you do that? Because to your employer, to you, the people you work with, you are representing God to them. Believe me, they all figure out you're a little bit different. They know your religion's a little bit different. Wherever you are, you represent God. And it's that way when you go to work. So when you go to work, you give everything you have. Look what it says in 1 Timothy. Here Paul writing once again, 1 Timothy chapter 6. He really spells it out here. He says, let as many bondservants as are under the yoke, in other words, and sometimes when you work for somebody else, you're under a yoke, right? You don't show up on time. And by the way, that's one of the reasons that kept coming up, people were getting fired. Now, certain companies are very loose with that policy. Certain aren't. I mean, if you worked for a company that said, what time we start? Oh, 9:30, just sort of whenever you come in. And there's companies like that. Then you get a company that says, we expect you here at 8:30. And you're there at 8:40 and they fire you. And you can say, well, the last company wasn't like this. This isn't fair. And they say, but you don't work for the last company. You work for us. And so it is a yoke to work for other people. Now, it doesn't mean it can't be fun. I mean, I enjoy being a pastor. No, I love being a pastor. But there are days where it's tough. There's days where it's tough. He says, count their own masters as worthy of honor. Why? I mean, all of us here have worked for some person that wasn't worthy of honor, right? We've all been there. So why would you do that? And here's why. So that the name of God and his teachings will not be blasphemed. So that the name of God won't be blasphemed. They may say, I don't like you. They may not like you because you are so honest. They may not like you because you are obeying God. But God won't be blasphemed. And that's why I said, when you go to work, you represent God. When you go to work, you are there. Your work ethic is part of your Christianity. So we should talk about this. Yes, it is important. And yes, it is one of the keys to success. Sometimes younger people, struggle with, we all did at one. Although I didn't. When I was young, I figured out somehow, I don't know why, when I was about 15 years old, I made a list of all the things I wanted to do in life. Get baptized, find me a good woman that'll take me, have children. Okay, that was number 3. After that, it was work in radio, become a television talk show host, become an author of books, work as a reporter for a while. I had all these things I was going to do. Some of them I've done. I tell you what, being a minister wasn't on the list. Some I've done, some I haven't. But we all struggle with, what am I supposed to do with my life? Okay. You will have lots of choices in life, and you probably, whatever choice you make at 18, you're going to change. The important thing is, what is your work ethic? Because you can change. I mean, I've known of people who were doctors and became something else at age 30 and have been very successful. They were successful doctors, now they're successful something else. I mean, what a change. You become a doctor at 28 and 35, you change jobs. You can have lots of choices in life. The important thing is if you learn how to work, you actually are equipped to make those choices, and you'll be equipped to make the changes if you want to. If you don't know how to work, you don't have the ability to make the changes. There are people who are trapped in jobs because they've never learned how to work and they can't get out of it. It's all they can do. Now, some people, it depends on your personality. You find a job and you like it and you stay in it for the rest of your life. And that's great too. But you have the equipment to make the decision. You see what I mean? You have the ability to make those decisions because your character is right. Your work ethic is right. Otherwise, other people make those decisions for you. And so that's what this is about. And so you are following God. You are doing this because you represent God. Now, that would change a lot of things, how you handle a lot of things at work. So that's the first point I want to make. We work, when you go to work, you're going to work there as a representative of God. Now, you have to accept that. If you don't accept that, it's like everything else. You either accept you're a Christian or not, but we shouldn't call ourselves Christian if we don't believe that we are followers of Christ and represent Christ. If we're Christians, we represent Him. What we do at work counts. What we do at work matters. I mean, you spend 8 hours 40 hours a week at least at work. Probably more. And a lot of even your happiness depends on what happens when you work. A lot of times people drag home their problems from work and bring them home and have a rotten marriage because of the problems they have at work. Especially if they're both working, they both drag it home and not one can't help the other and they're unhappy. And the real issue sometimes isn't the marriage, the real issue is what's happening at work. The second point, now we're going to get down some real practical. The first thing here is a little bit conceptual. We work to represent God. Okay, so that means what I do is important. The second is that a proper work ethic requires that, there's a little list, you accomplish the work that is assigned to you in the way that it has been assigned to you and in the time allotted. Here's your job, do it this way, and do it in this amount of time. Now, sometimes you go back and say, hey, this way doesn't work. Sometimes you go back and say, hey, I can't do it in this amount of time. Sometimes you go back and say, hey, I finished early. So I didn't go to sleep, or I didn't sit around and, just call up and look at pictures of puppies. Instead, I've come and said, what do you want me to do next, boss? I mean, one of the reasons we hate work so much is we get bored because we're bored with what we're doing. You're never bored when you're locked into doing something and you're putting your effort into it. Proverbs 26. Here's where it shows laziness is a moral deficiency. It is a moral problem. Proverbs 26, verse 13. The lazy man says, there is a lion in this road, a fierce lion in the streets. In other words, I can't go outside. They have an excuse for everything. I mean, the excuse is there's a lion in the streets. It's silly. There's no lion in the street. It doesn't matter. In other words, the excuse doesn't matter. I'm just not going to do it. I just make up an excuse. As a door turns on its hinges, so does the lazy man on his bed. I love that one. You've heard an old creaky door that's all rusty and will hardly open. Although I have to admit, at 63, there's days that getting out of bed is like that. But it's literal because that's the sound of my joints, okay? But we have to make ourselves get up and go. And there's a few people, most of us really can't believe it. They just wake up, jump out of bed, they're happy, they're ready to go. And it's like rest of us, we just sort of walk around in a stupor for a while and grunt for coffee and, But you make yourself do it. More people have lost jobs because they simply won't make themselves do it. And he calls this a lazy person. The lazy man buries his hand in the bowl and worries it to bring it back to his mouth. Now you can imagine, you take your spoon and you stick it in the bowl and you just sit and stare and say, would someone feed me, please? And there's an absurdity to this. The lazy man is wiser in his own eyes than 7 men who can answer sensibly, and that's very true. The more lazy we are, the more reasons we have for being lazy, the more reasons why it's somebody else's fault, and the more reasons why everybody that tells us, no, that's not how the way it works, we say they're either wrong or they don't understand, or, hey, get out of my face, you're oppressing me. And so we stay the way we are. And so there is an amount of effort that we have to put into this. A small business had a sign hanging on the wall that said, "If you don't believe the dead come back to life, you've never been here at quitting time." You know, all work does have some drudgery. I mean, I have to admit, when I'm doing paperwork sometimes, I'd rather be out visiting people or, working on a Bible study. I have certain paperwork I have to do. But it has to be done. So you pile through it. I'll tell my wife I'm going up to my office. I'll be up there for 3 hours. I'm doing paperwork. And I find out when I tell her that, she won't even talk to me for 3 hours. It's like, he's up there, leave him alone, right? But you got to plow through it. You got to make yourself do it. It has to be done. It has to be done. There is a point we have to face no matter what the job you have. And sometimes when you start out in a job, they give you the worst jobs to begin with. And you have to do the worst jobs. I think I've mentioned this before. I worked in the Worldwide Church of God, I worked at SEP. And I worked 2 summers where I was in charge of the janitorial crew. Now, one of the things we had to do was the bathhouses every morning after hundreds of teenagers went in and destroyed it. We would get a dorm of maybe, 30 teenagers, and now we had to go clean up something that was like out of a horror movie. I can't explain what 200 teenagers will do to a bathhouse, okay? And they would all be, griping and complaining. They didn't want to go in, so I had to give them the little speech all the time. And the little speech was, in life, you're going to be asked to do things you don't want to do. We have an hour to do this. We can go make this a game, and I and the other 2 people I had working with me, we'll go in and help you do it. We'll get right, the toilets are always clogged up. It was just horrible. We will help you do this. And if we work as a team, and you do what we say, we'll be done in a half hour. And then, the other half hour, you have off. You can do whatever you want. You can go sit around, all they ever wanted to do was when they were done was just go sit around and talk. You could do that. If you don't, you'll be here the full hour and only half the job will be done. And you will hate it every minute. And so we would go in, and for 20 minutes, a half hour, we told them how to work as a team. We told them what to do, how to motivate each other. When one person slacks, everybody's got to make them work, and they did. And they were always done in a half hour. And then they had a half hour off. Well, I can't say always, because sometimes you get a group that just wouldn't do it. And an hour later, they were mad and grumpy. They'd be mad and grumpy the whole rest of the morning. They were upset. They hated it. How dare people make them have to do this? And they were miserable. Now, everybody had the same job, and it was just as bad for everybody. And some groups came out of there, fired up, ready to go, hey, man, we got a half hour. Other groups after an hour we hated this. And they never, it would take them a long time to get over it. The idea is at times we just have to say, the job has to be done, and we throw ourselves into it completely. Many years later, I had a man come up to me and say, hey, you changed my life. I said, I did? How did I ever change your life? He said, at SEP. That little talk you gave to us every time when we had to go in and clean out the bathhouse. I said, yeah. He said, I applied that to my life, and he says, now I own my own business, and I'm quite wealthy. You simply attack the job at hand. And then you go do something else. But you attack the worst job by attacking it. You go into it. You do your work. The work ethic requires that you accomplish the work assigned to you, the way that has been assigned, and in the time allotted. And so you do it. A third point. A proper work ethic requires you use your time to give your employee a full day's work. You give them a full day's work. Say, yeah, but sometimes, 8 hours is a long time. I understand. But when I started to look at the reasons people get fired, and so many of the times it's because they're not working. They're not working. They're talking, they're gossiping, they're texting, they're doing all different kinds of things. Understand this. What if a friend of yours said, here, I can't go to the store. I'm going to give you $100 to go to the store and get all this stuff for me. Here's $100. And since you're doing this for me and it's so nice, get yourself some lunch. You said, okay, and you took their $100. And you're supposed to be back in an hour. You come back 3 hours later, and instead of the list, you have 2 things in a bag. And they say, well, wait a minute, I had all this stuff. And you say, yeah, but, I was having such a good time at lunch and picked up a couple other friends, and we used your money buying lunch, and all I had left was to get you this. You'd say, you stole my money, right? If someone did that to you, wouldn't you say, you stole my money? When you go and work for a person and agree to work for them for a certain amount of money, and you don't give them a full day's work, I don't care how much the money is. The money isn't the issue. It's you that's the issue, who you are. And you don't give them a full day's work, you're stealing from the employer. You're stealing their time. I'm going to pay you to work for me. Thank you, I'll take the money and I won't work. It's stealing. There's a point of dishonesty here. So we don't think that way. There's a point of dishonesty. Ways that we waste time at work. Oh, good, another survey. No, I'm going to go to the Bible. Proverbs 14. A couple places in Proverbs. Proverbs 14. There's a lot of benefits to work in our character, and even some happiness. We'll talk about that in a minute. Proverbs 14:23. In all labor there is profit. There's a benefit from work. And once again, being a workaholic isn't the issue here. It's working that's the issue. When you are supposed to work, you work. In all labor there's profit, but an idle chatter leads only to poverty. In other words, you spend all your time talking at work, on your computer at work, unless you're working on a computer, obviously, texting at work, sharing all your different plans and getting together all the people you're going out to dinner with afterwards, and you do all that while at work, you can end up in poverty because you're not going to have a job. You say, boy, that employer sure is mean and tough. What's their problem? Now remember, they paid you to work. They offered you money to work, and you agreed to it. If you don't like the agreement, quit. But don't steal from them. You're going to get in a bad job some point in life, too. Once again, if you have the right character, if you have the tools, you'll be able to get out of a bad job. If you don't have the tools, guess what happens? I can't get out of a bad job because I can't get any job. Or you quit and end up what? Doing nothing. I've seen people quit jobs. I knew a man one time who had been fired. I don't remember the exact number now. It was so many years ago. This is like 35 years ago. But I think he'd been fired from 12 jobs in 16 years, all because of the Sabbath. I don't believe that. You might lose a job or two over the Sabbath, but if you're a good employee, you're going to find a job someplace. I think he's a bad employee. Now, a couple times might have been over the Sabbath, but I don't believe all of them were. Look at Proverbs 12:11. Proverbs 12:11. He who tills his land will be satisfied with bread, but he who follows frivolity is devoid of understanding. In other words, he who just, all I want to do is have fun. Well, there's a time for fun, by the way. God is not against fun. There's a time for fun. And it's great when your work is fun, too. I mean, I have fun times at my job sometimes, and sometimes it's not. But when you just pursue having fun instead of getting joy out of your work, he says, you don't understand what's going to happen to you. It doesn't work that way. Proverbs 19:15. Proverbs chapter 19 and verse 15. Laziness casts one into a deep sleep, and an idle person will suffer hunger. In other words, when we are lazy, you know what happens? We get tired all the time. We lose a desire to achieve anything. Part of work is achieving something. It's achieving something. Now, some of you remember a couple years ago, I kept using the example how I told my wife I would paint the bathroom and then didn't do it. Okay? Well, I don't know, about 9 months ago, I painted the bathroom, okay? But I have to tell you, when I finished painting that bathroom, she wasn't there. I thought it'll surprise her. And I looked around and I thought, I really feel good about this. And then she walked in and said, it needs another coat. So I put another coat on and I felt good about that too. Right? When you accomplish something, you feel good. And that is where, sometimes you don't work because of your boss, and you don't work because of the money. Sometimes you work because in the end, I did a good job. I did that. It's your character that counts. It's who you are that counts. And so you do what's right. Otherwise, you just get sleep. The more lazy you are, it's the strangest thing. You ever say, oh, I wish I had a day off with nothing to do? I do that. And every once in a while, I try to take a day off with nothing to do. And it's okay for a while. Then I start getting antsy and sort of, nervous and sort of crazy-like. And then, then I have to tell myself, settle down. There's work to do tomorrow. It's okay. So you can't be a workaholic either. But it's funny. If I had nothing to do all the time, I'd be miserable, wouldn't you? If you had nothing, no goals, nothing to do, nothing to achieve, you'd be miserable. Oh, I just wish somebody would take care of me. No, you don't. You don't want to live life with somebody just taking care of you every moment. We're not designed to be that way. We're designed to go work and produce and achieve. All of us are. Every human being. Or we just get sleepy. A fourth point is that a proper work ethic means that we exhibit a very high standard of honesty and morality. Let's go to Titus 2. Titus 2. And I'm going to read this from the NIV. In the King James, it says bondservant here, which is more of an employee relationship. But here, in this translation, this is Titus 2, verse 9. Teach slaves to be subject to their masters in everything, to try to please them, not talk back to them. Okay, just talk back to your employer all the time. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't give good suggestions. Most employers want you might get some hard-nosed person that doesn't, but most employers want a good suggestion if they can see it's good. Hey, if we do this, would this make this better? Because they know you now, hey, you're concerned about the job. You're concerned about what you're doing. Your work is important to you. But he says, and not to steal from them, but to show that they can be fully trusted, so that in every way they will make the teaching about God our Savior attractive. He says, you be so honest, such a good, upstanding person, such a moral person, that you make Christianity attractive to pagans. Boy, I wish I had more Christians like you working, for me. Because you're good workers. I can trust you people. You're not going to steal from me. I'm not going to have to worry because I can't figure out why. I just bought a box of copy paper and half of it's gone. Oh, I took it home. My kids use it. That's stealing. And so we are to make, it's so fascinating here. Paul over and over again says, remember when you're out there working, who you represent. Be moral and be honest. We should be very, very, very honest. And don't think they don't notice. People notice whether you're honest or not. They do. They will notice whether you're honest or not. And this is more important than your job title. This is more important than how much money you make. Your honesty. I've seen Christians sacrifice their honesty for more money, or sacrifice their honesty to get a higher position. And that's not what this is about. That higher position or more money means nothing to God. Honesty means something to God. So don't buy into this sort of American dream. The more power and money I have, the more important I am to God. Because that's not true. It's just not true. It's who you are as his child that's important to him. Let me just sort of wrap up with a few things here. Why do we work then? Okay, we work what's our benefit, if you will, from working? Constructive work gives us a sense of purpose and a sense of accomplishment in your daily life. I'm 63. I know a lot of men and women that retire at 65. I couldn't imagine retiring at 65. I can't even imagine. I need to accomplish. I get so much more to accomplish. In fact, I'm getting to the place that I'm even more serious about what I have to accomplish because, I don't have a lot of time left here. I'm going to live another 30 years. I got more things to accomplish. And so this constructive work gives us a sense of accomplishment. Even if our boss, see, once again, you get a benefit from working. What did God tell Adam and Eve? Go to Genesis 2:15. Genesis 2. It's a very important passage here. Then the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to tend it and to keep it. You are to work this garden. He didn't say, here's the garden. It'll just sort of grow itself. Just let everything run wild. It'll be fine. He says you are to tend it and to keep it. You have work to do here, son. And you're going to like working. You're going to get up in the morning and you're going to enjoy going out and tending the garden. Without a sense of accomplishment, without things to do, Adam would have been bored, even in Eden. We are designed to accomplish things. There's a study that was done in Harvard. And it's an interesting study because the first time I read of this study was in the 1980s. And it had started clear back in the 1940s. I just read this week, because I was looking up the study continues on. Some of the people involved in this study in the 1940s are still alive. And they're still studying them, these people at Harvard. The people who started the original study are all dead. It's new, but they've been studying these I think it was 465 boys. And they were all from inner city Boston. And they had all different backgrounds and all different economic backgrounds and educational backgrounds and ethic backgrounds. And, they were just from all over the place. And so they started to go through them. What were they like at 15 and where were they at 25? And where were they? So in the 1980s, these guys are in their 40s and 50s. Well, they're in their 50s at this point. And they found some very interesting things. Now, as they continued on, as they got older, into their 70s and 80s now, and 90s, they found that there were two things that changed their lives more than anything. One was the quality of relationships they had when they were younger, whether they were adults who loved them or not. Well, yeah, that makes sense, doesn't it? That was the number one impact on their lives, whether there were adults that loved them and interacted with them as children. The second one was whether they had work to do as a child. Now you say, oh, well, just put our kids in the salt mines. This was as simple as mowing the grass. It was as simple as cleaning your room. And in doing so, they found out that the people who had, these young boys who had interactive relationships, people who actually cared for them and taught them and interacted with them, and then they were made to work. Those were the two greatest factors in their success of life. And how happy they were. People who work and put themselves into their work are happier. They're not bored. They have purpose. And like I said, these jobs weren't just okay, you're 15, go get a job, No, it could be as simple as, okay, you have chores and you have to take out the garbage and you participate in what the family does. Or sometimes these boys came from broken families. Still, there was always some adult somewhere that interacted with them in a positive way. And they always had some value in their work. I'm producing something, and as I produce something, I have value. I produce something, and therefore I have value. And as they grew up, that changed their lives. One of the greatest gifts you can give your children, the greatest gift you can give your children is your love and your time. A second greatest gift you can give them is teaching them God's way. Now, you have to give them love and time before you can teach them God's way. Okay, we're going to have school today. I'm going to teach you God's way, and the rest of the time, I'm going to ignore you. That doesn't work. You give them love and time first, and that builds the relationship that you can say, let me tell you about God, and it means something. If we don't give our children of ourselves, then somebody else gives them of themselves, and it's probably the kid next door. You see what I mean? We can't let other people raise our children. We have to give them our love and our time. Then the second most important thing you can do is give them God's way and teach it and live it for them. And the third most important thing you can do, make them do some chores. Make them do some work. That there's purpose in work. There's meaning in work. I can remember my dad telling me we sanded floors, which is hard work. And I was a teenager. He said, I worked hard. My dad pushed me because he was pushing me all the time. Do this better, work harder, do this, just all the time. He said that one day, he said, okay, you got to finish this job, and he left. And he said, I thought, good, I'm going to take a cigarette break, because he was a chain smoker before he came into the church. He said, but I couldn't. I tried, and I couldn't light it. I had to go finish the job. So when I was about 17, one day he said, you got to finish the job. I said, oh, good. And when he showed up, I'm just finishing it. And he said, yep, that's what I figured, how long it would take you to finish it. And I thought, yeah, I just finished the job. He did the same thing to me that his dad did to him. We have to realize that we teach them to work. And I sure was proud of that floor. I still remember it. I still remember that it was a Lebanese club. And they had like a meeting room, ballroom in it. And that looked like a sheet of glass. That floor had been just sanded perfectly and finished perfectly. And it looked like, and I still remember that. I'm probably 17 years old. I don't remember any of the girls when I was 17, but I remember that floor. A second reason we work is to support our families. This is important to God. 1 Timothy 5:8. I don't remember any girls because it seems to me that I've been married. It seems to me I've known my wife since I was a baby. It seems somehow we've been connected since we were children. I know that's not true, but it seems to me that way. So I don't remember anybody else. She's always been there. 1 Timothy 5:8. But if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his own house, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Think about that statement. If you can work, now once again, sometimes we can't work, or sometimes we're limited in what we can do, or sometimes we just don't have opportunities. I mean, sometimes you look at Darius McNeely just got back from a trip to Africa, and some of those people are doing as hard as they can, and there's only so much money they can bring in. You can work 15 hours a day, and you're never going to get out of a dirt hut. But they work. You do your part. He's saying here, the person says, nah, take care of me. He says, you're worse than a person that's not even a Christian. See how much he ties this into our Christianity? We have responsibilities. We work for other people. And I'm going to speak to the young men here. Guys, young men, when you marry and you have children, and especially if your wife says, I need to stay home and take care of those children, your God-given responsibility is to take care of them. I don't care what the cost. If we can't do that, don't get married and don't have children. Be man enough not to do it. Our responsibility is to take care of those if they need us. And, sometimes women will have careers and then have 2 or 3 children and say, I can't do this. I can't do both of them. And we man up. How many hours a week do you work to do that? As many as it takes. As many as it takes. That's what we do. And if we aren't willing to do that, you're not worthy of a wife. It's that simple. That's what Paul's saying. There's a loss of manhood that I'm concerned with. We sacrifice what we have to sacrifice for our families. That's part of work. Now, fortunately, hopefully you have a job, you don't have to do all that. But believe me, I know years ago, when I was a kid, I saw men work 2 or 3 jobs to feed a family. Not because they had a great career. They worked 2 or 3 jobs just to feed a family. They would do whatever it took. People had bigger families. The woman couldn't work. She had 6 kids. And that's what they did. Did they want to work 3 jobs? No. Why did they do it? It's what we do. We work to help those who are in financial need. I know sometimes some of these ideas are not popular in our society. The destruction of manhood is one of the most terrible things that's happened to our country. And now what's happening is the destruction of womanhood. I mean, what God expects of women. If you destroy the men, what are the women going to do? Right? What choice do they have? And now we have little 3-year-olds that have decided that they're of a different sex. And parents who say, okay. A society cannot survive that. Understand that. A society cannot survive that. Oh, it won't fall tomorrow, but it will fall. That is totally against the way anything has worked. Even the pagans knew that much. Even the ancient pagans knew that much. Ephesians 4:28. Let him who stole steal no more. So he's just telling people in the church, look, you got to change if you used to be a thief, you're a Christian now. You're going to stop being a thief. But notice what he says. But rather let him labor, working with his hands, what is good, that he may have something to give who has need. Paul actually says to people in the church, okay, not stealing is the letter of the law. You and I have to go way beyond the letter of the law. He says, go work so you can help somebody else and give them a hand up. Go work so you can give to somebody else. Somebody gives you a hand up, you go work and give somebody. It's not like, oh, good, somebody gave me a hand up, keep giving me a handout. No, if someone gives you a hand up, you go work and give somebody else a hand up. You and I are required by God to help each other in our times of need, in our times of poverty, in our times of old age, in our times of widowhood. We are required to help each other. It's at the center of God's way, that kind of love. And he says, start in the church of God, start in the house of God. And then obviously with their own families, whether they're in the church or not. That's where we just start. And then a last reason, of course, is you and I have a duty to pay tithes and offerings to God. It's a duty. And we should work because we wish to fulfill that duty. The work habits we form are part of our character. It's part of who we are. This is practical Christianity. You say, well, wow, you've made looking at my cell phone at my desk some church issue. No, it's practical Christianity. This isn't church issue, it's Christianity issue. Work is important. And every day you have an opportunity when you go to work to be dependable and responsible and to show people what a Christian looks like. We're honest. We work hard. We're trustworthy. Those are all words that came up in what we've talked about here. Also, you're going to be a whole lot happier when you just work hard. I don't care what it is. Scrubbing floors. Cleaning toilets. Those are just, I think all the things I've done in my life. Sanding floors, painting houses. Well, I did have one job I failed miserably at. It was being a roofer. And the guy hired me, his son hired me, and I said, I don't know anything about roofing. I know nothing. He said, yeah, well, don't tell my dad. We just need some guys to work. So I spent 12 hours on a roof trying to watch everybody else and figure out what they were doing, So at the end, the guy said, you're a hard worker, but you know absolutely nothing about roofing. And I said, I know I don't. He says, well, I'm going to pay you because you're a hard worker, but I got to have somebody who knows about roofing. I said, I understand. I didn't tell your son I knew anything about roofing. And of course, they all laughed. They thought it was sort of funny. I was so glad I got fired from that job. I hated that job. But I wasn't going to quit. I had told him I'd work the summer. I was going to work the summer, and I thought by the end of summer, I'll have figured out how to be a roofer. But I was so glad I didn't have to figure out how to be a roofer. Okay? But I said I would. You know why I was going to do that? Not because I have great character, because my dad had drilled me so much, I had to finish the job. Even if it was going to be all summer, I was going to learn how to be a roofer. So I was glad. And don't ask me to roof because I have no idea how to do that. But these things make us happier. And it's these things that make up our work ethic. These are the traits that God is looking for. And these are the traits, not your job, but these character traits that God is going to use to serve Jesus Christ when he comes.